Today we'll take up fibrous joint. So first of all, I draw the bit of hierarchy of the joints which we are taking up. The synarthrosis, diarthrosis, and the synarthrosis. What we have cartilaginous joints, we have fibrous joint. So we have covered up the cartilaginous joint. Now we are going to take up the fibrous joint. So fibrous joint, further if we classify them, they are further having three important components of the types. These are unique ones which are seen only on the teeth. Sutures, you know about the sutures, particularly the cranial suture and the syndesmosis. Right? These are three basic varieties of the fibrous joint. The more important of them, the sutures, which we'll take up first in our study. Right? So, see, we are taking up sutures. The prominent sutures which we know about are the ones which are present in the cranial region. And what a suture actually consists of? We know that there are two plates of bone, and in the case of particularly the cranial suture, the bones which are present, they are not having that the formation or the ossification in the cartilage, but they ossify from the mesenchymal cells which are present in the subcutaneous region. Under the skin, the mesenchymal condensations take place, and subdermally, as we can say them, and then from them these bones ossify. So what kind of ossification is there? Intramembranous ossification, or we also call it the subdermal kind of ossification. So altogether different from the one which is taking place in the synchondrosis, where the endochondral kind of ossification is taking place. So in the sutural joint of the cranial region, intramembranous ossification in the bones is taking place, which is also called as subdermal. So to say these are two parietal bones at the top, right? Where the sagittal suture is present, two parietal bone. We know together that there is a suture in between them. These are two bones. The bones are present inside. They are surrounded by a porous tissue which we call as cambium. The cambium, which is limited by a membrane. It's a fibrous structure. The fibrous membrane it is. Right? And of course, what is there? The periosteum. The periosteum of the two bones, which is continuous on the upper side as well as the lower side. This periosteum is double layered, as we know, right? So, and here in between the tissue which is joining it, fibrous tissue, which is identical to the tissue of the periosteum, that is of the fibrous membrane, which is present there, and the periosteum which is present, and what is left in between, in the middle part, there is a connective tissue. This connective tissue basically, this is all collagenous tissue, right? The collagenous tissue, the fibrous tissue. So what we have a bone, a developing bone, surrounded by a loose cambium. It's again a bony tissue basically, and having a fibrous layer all around it, fibrous layer, and that fibrous layer connect with the periosteum. Fibrous layer connect with the periosteum of the bone and continues between the two bones, right? And in between these two fibrous layer structures, the connective tissue, which is a collagenous in nature. So this together, it forms a joint which is called as fibrous joint. This is fibrous joint. This fibrous joint, because of this, it is categorized under the fibrous joint, and it is a suture. Now, the sutures are further of many types. Mind you, the basic tissue is fibrous tissue, collagenous tissue. Type 1, type 2, collagens are present, which are rich here. And but on the basis of the nature of the opposing surfaces, the sutures are divided. These sutures, on the basis of the nature of opposing surfaces, are divided as, number one, the sutures can be, margins can be serrated, or the margins can be denticulated, or the margins can be plain, or there is another one class which we call as the squamous kind of sutures. If we take the examples, serrated margin, the sagittal suture which we have, what is a serrated margin? One bone, another bone, and there are serrations, fine serration, and in between them what is there? This is a fibrous tissue. If we cut the section will be like this. One bone, another bone, fibrous layer, periosteum, the connective tissue, which is actually the fibrous tissue in between, right? So this is serrated kind of suture. And what is denticulate? Denticulate is the one which provide even more strength to the joint. How it is that one bone, another bone. See, here the margins are fine, they can be pulled apart, but you cannot pull these two structures. They are fitted into each other, like that jigsaw puzzles generally we have. These are fitted into each other. It's difficult to pull them back, and of course in between them what is present? The fibrous tissue, which is formed, right? And the squamous type particularly are the one in the region, and where it is present, it is present in the lambda region. If you see the top of the skull, what you have? You have sagittal suture in the center, and then what we have? Lambdoid suture. This is serrated and this is denticulated. And on the lateral side, if you see on the lateral side, this is parietal bone forming the sutures here, and what is present here? Temporal bone. So between the temporal bone and the parietal bone above, this suture, which is having two congruent surfaces, and particularly in this one, the surfaces are not like this, rather surfaces are overlapping, and the overlapping surfaces are rough, and they have congruent surfaces. Where there's a depression, there will be crest. So they kind of fit with each other. The margins are overlapping, and this is particularly seen in this area, the squamous part of temporal bone and the parietal bone. This is a squamous suture, right? Plain, as the terminology suggests, they are more of the plain kind, with the minimal kind of invagination of the two margins into each other. Means if they are very close to each other and the margins, they push into the opposite bone to a very less extent, right? So they are, of course, they are not plain, but they still are termed as a plain junction. So another important kind of suture is what we call as shin dialysis. If you recall the presence of the vomer bone, which is forming the nasal septum, there is perpendicular plate of ethmoid. Below that, the vomer is present. Vomer is going deep down under the sphenoid, and under the sphenoid, what is there? There is a bifurcated surface of the sphenoid. So in that bifurcated, there is a spine of the sphenoid. The vomer is bifurcated. So this vomer, which is having plane, the posterior side is bifurcated. It fits into the spine of the sphenoid. So spine actually fits into this kind of bifurcated border of the vomer. So this forms a special kind of joint which called as a shin dialysis joint. So these are all sutures. Sutures mean the opposite surfaces, they are separated by the fibrous tissue. And what is the pattern of the junction? It is the pattern of the junction, right? Same way, initially the fibrous tissue is present. It provides some kind of flexibility to the sutural joint, but later on they are completely ossified. This fibrous tissue get mineralized and it completely converts into the bone. Fine. So this is about the sutures and different kind of examples of it. Another variety of the fibrous joint is gomophosis, which I just explained. It is present at only one place, that where the tooth, I draw it here, is fitted in the alveolar process, respective upper or the lower, upper belonging to maxilla and lower belonging to the mandible. This alveolar process, which is having a cavity, fits into it, the tooth, and tooth here, it is gummed, attached with the help of the special fibrous tissue. What we call that? Here it is, the cementum is present here, right? So this special fibrous tissue, which is binding the tooth with the alveolar process, forming a joint, special joint we call as the gomophosis. And then finally, third variety, which is even more diffused in nature, syndesmosis. Syndesmosis kind of joints, they were classified on the basis that if there are two bones and in between them an interosseous ligament is present, ligament. Now, ligament is also fibrous in nature, but its structure is very specific from the general collagenous fiber, right? This interosseous ligament is present between the two bones, then this will be called as the syndesmosis. This will be called as syndesmosis, and original in the when this classification was devised, then on the lowermost side, the joint, this one is the inferior tibiofibular joint. Inferior tibiofibular joint having that ligament between the two bones, which is interosseous ligament, now we call it. This was termed as the sole example of the syndesmosis. But that rendered the unusefulness of a classification that a single joint is present. Gomophosis single joint is present. Does it mean that all the joints, all the fibrous joints, they can be put under only one category, the suture? No. It is thought now that whenever any kind of joint, in any kind of joint where interosseous ligament is present and the surfaces other than sutures, different kind of sutures or attachments where opposite bones, they are forming congruent surfaces, then that joint and the involved are fibers, that can be called as a syndesmosis. Right? You know the misuse of the syndesmo word. Sometime the arthrology, the study of joint, it is also called as syndesmology. Syndesmology is another name which is not a very accurate name. The arthrology is the more accurate name which we use. That when between the two bones, a tissue connect them together. You remember those desmosomes in the cellular epithelium. Epithelial tissue hota hai. There are two cells, right? Two cells, they are held together by desmosomes. Desmosomes were special kind of intercellular spaces where there were no gaps. They were tightly attached to each other. You remember that? So, in the same way, if that tissue here, particularly the connective tissue, is that fibrous tissue, then we call it them as the syndesmosis, that particular joint. So by that sense, all the joints, say you see all the carpal joints, you see all the tarsal joints, or where they are joined with each other, there are a lot of ligaments, interosseous ligaments. You know, particularly in the tarsal region, you find a lot of synovial spaces, there are a lot of intertarsal ligaments present over there, lot of hyaline surfaces where hyaline cartilages are present only. So that's a mix of every kind of joint. There are a lot of cartilages, there are a lot of fibers spread over different joints. So syndesmosis have to be understood as a joint where interosseous ligament in any form, that can be, you remember a membrane, the interosseous membrane between the two? Radius and ulna also, there is an interosseous membrane. So this is a ligament, it's made up of ligament. This is again a ligament which is connecting the two bones. So this joint is again a syndesmosis. So syndesmosis has a very wide implication. Its definition is so diffuse that classifying it as a single structure, it becomes slightly difficult. So if we want to divide the fibrous joint, we can divide it on the basis of the region that when the two bones are present and they show congruent surfaces pushing into each other in a variety of form, we classify them as sutures. And when they are lying side by side, maybe very close to each other or maybe separated by large distances, but in between them they are connected with the help of some ligament or other fibrous tissue, we call them the syndesmosis. Right? So we have to be very flexible with the definition of the syndesmosis. Syndesmosis cannot be classified as a very organized kind of a joint structure. Joint structure is variable. Only commonality is that between the two planes of the bone which are not fitting into each other, otherwise they will be sutures, and a fibrous tissue is present which is joining the two. That is syndesmosis. So with this actually we complete the fibrous joint. That's it.